The chandelier light caught the crystal glasses like captured stars, but the real glow in La Dolce Vita that night came from the quiet fury in Elena Rossi's eyes. She stood beside table 12, notepad trembling slightly in her hand, apron tied so tightly around her waist it felt like the only thing holding her together. 28 years old, she still carried the scent of sun-baked earth from her childhood village outside Siena, even after 3 years in New York. The cypress trees back home stood like silent guardians over olive groves that had fed generations of Rossis. Those same groves now felt impossibly far away. Her mother's hospital bills arrived like clockwork. Chemo sessions, scans, medications that cost more than Elena earned in a month. The online business degree she pursued in stolen hours between double shifts was her lifeline, her promise to herself that this wasn't forever. Tonight, like every night, she forced the polite smile that had become her second skin. Then the door opened, and the air in the restaurant changed. Ethan Blackwood entered like a storm front. Dark hair swept back, winter ocean eyes, shoulders that made the charcoal suit look as though it had been poured over him while still molten. 35. CEO of Blackwood Technologies. The name alone opened doors, silenced rooms, moved markets. He could have purchased La Dolce Vita twice over and still had enough left for the entire wine cellar. He moved with the effortless arrogance of someone who had never once been denied. He slid into the banquette at table 12 with 2 associates, men whose cufflinks probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent. Their laughter rang sharp, metallic, the sound of deals being sealed over rare steak and older Bordeaux. Elena approached, pen poised. "Buonasera, signori. May I take your order?" Ethan glanced up. His gaze skimmed her face, brief, dismissive, then dropped to the menu. A small, cruel smirk curled his lip. He leaned back, switched to Italian with the precision of someone who had studied it for sport rather than necessity, and spoke deliberately loud. "Vediamo se questa ragazza capisce qualcosa oltre l'inglese de fast food. Portami l'ossobuco, ma fallo autentico, per favor. Se non lo è, rimandalo indietro con un biglietto che dice mi dispiace, non tutti nascono con il palato. E un burrolo del 96, se avete qualcosa che non se di tappo." His associates laughed on cue. One even raised his water glass in mock toast. The words landed like slaps. Elena felt heat climb her neck, but she didn't flinch. She set the notepad on the table with deliberate slowness. Then, in Italian so melodic and flawless it could have belonged to a poet from the Renaissance, she answered. "Capisco ogni singola parola, signore. L'ossobuco è stato cotto per sé or con lo stesso amore con cui. Mia nonna lo preparava nella nostra cucina a Montalcino. E autentico quanto il mio accento toscano, che le trova così divertente. Quanto al biglietto di scuse, glielo scrivo io stessa, ma lo costerà più del piatto. Il Brolo 96 è excellent. Ne abbiamo ancora tre bottiglie. Spiro che il suo palato sia all'altezza del superole." Silence fell so heavily the clink of cutlery at nearby tables sounded obscene. Ethan's smirk vanished. His eyes, those cold, assessing eyes, locked onto hers for the first time. Really locked. Something flickered there. Surprise, then recognition, then something deeper and more dangerous. His associates shifted uncomfortably, suddenly fascinated by their napkins. Elena turned on her heel and walked to the kitchen, heart slamming against her ribs so hard she thought it might bruise them. She could feel his gaze burning into her back the entire way. She didn't know it yet, but in that single exchange Ethan Blackwood had been pierced by a memory he had buried for 17 years. A little girl with braids and a sunburned nose who laughed at his clumsy attempts to say ciao under an olive tree. He returned the next night. Alone. Elena spotted him the instant he crossed the threshold. Same commanding stride. But the suit was midnight blue tonight. The tie loosened as though he had already surrendered something. He asked the hostess for her section specifically. Elena's first instinct was to trade tables with Marco, the senior waiter who owed her a favor. Pride, however, the same pride that had kept her standing straight through 12-hour shifts and condescending customers, refused. She approached with a water glass and a carefully neutral expression. "Back for more humiliation?" she asked in English, voice low. He met her eyes without flinching. I came to apologize. In whatever language you prefer. She studied him for a long beat. You chose Italian last night. Stay with it. Me despias, he said, softer this time, almost reverent. I was showing off. It was cruel and unnecessary. I didn't expect you to answer like that. To answer at all. Most people don't expect a waitress to speak anything beyond broken English with an accent they can imitate for laughs, she replied. But I've spoken Italian since before I could walk properly. So next time, assume competence until proven otherwise. He nodded once, a small gesture that somehow carried weight. Fair. More than fair. She took his order. Ossobuco again, but this time without commentary, and a simple glass of Chianti instead of the trophy vintage. When she returned with the wine, he spoke again. May I know your name? Elena. Ethan. I know who you are, she said quietly. You're not exactly invisible, Mr. Blackwood. A faint, almost boyish smile touched his mouth, the first genuine one she had seen. Then you know I'm not accustomed to being put in my place. It was unexpectedly refreshing. She didn't return the smile. Don't get used to it. I'm here to serve food, not egos. But he came back the following night. And the night after that. At first their exchanges were careful, guarded. He asked about the daily specials in Italian. She answered in the same language, her tone dry and edged. He asked about Tuscany, real questions, not the tourist variety. She gave short, factual replies at first. Then he asked about her mother. That was the crack. She told him in halting sentences. About the diagnosis 2 years earlier, the endless rounds of treatment, the way her mother still tried to sound strong on every video call even when the pain made her voice tremble. About the money Elena wired home every paycheck, how it never felt like enough. Ethan listened without interrupting, without offering platitudes. When she finished, tears burning behind her eyes, he simply said, You carry a great deal alone. Someone has to, she whispered. After that night, the tips grew larger. Not ostentatious, but meaningful. The conversations stretched longer. He lingered after closing, waiting while she counted her drawer. Coffee turned into walks through Central Park at dawn, when the city still slept and the paths belonged only to joggers and dog walkers. He told her fragments of his own life. A childhood in glass towers, parents who measured love in quarterly reports, boarding schools where excellence was the only acceptable currency. She told him about summers spent barefoot in the olive groves, about the way the light turned gold at dusk, about a boy, American, awkward, 11 years old, who had spent one July promising he would learn Italian and come back. One humid August night, under a street lamp near her cramped walk-up apartment in Astoria, he kissed her. It wasn't dramatic or rehearsed. It simply happened. His hands rose slowly, framing her face as though she were made of something fragile and irreplaceable. Her fingers curled into the lapels of his coat, anchoring herself against the sudden rush of feeling. The city noise faded to a distant hum. When they finally parted, both breathing unevenly, he rested his forehead against hers. I'm falling in love with you, Elena. She searched his eyes, those eyes that had once looked through her, and found only truth. Then don't stop. For a while, it felt possible. They stole moments wherever they could. Late-night dinners at hole-in-the-wall places that didn't know his name. Weekends when he canceled meetings to sit on her tiny balcony with cheap wine and her homemade tiramisu. He taught her about venture capital and algorithms. She taught him how to properly roll gnocchi and curse in authentic Tuscan. They laughed until their sides ached. They made love slowly, reverently, learning each other's bodies the way they were learning each other's hearts. But the world outside never stayed quiet for long. Ethan's life was a machine that never truly stopped. Board meetings bled into midnight strategy sessions. Investors demanded FaceTime. Whispers about a transformative merger began circulating. Langford Industries, old money meeting new tech. The terms were elegant on paper. Synergies, market dominance, exponential growth. The unspoken clause was uglier, a symbolic union. Victoria Langford, poised, pedigreed, photographed at every gala, was the human face of the alliance. Marry her, the board implied, and the deal locks. Refuse, and the entire transaction could collapse. He told himself it was just business. He told himself he could navigate it without losing what mattered most. He told Elena nothing. She found out the way most people do in the digital age, a photo on his phone screen while he stepped away to take a call. Ethan and Victoria at the Metropolitan Museum Gala, her hand resting lightly on his forearm, his smile polished and practiced. The caption beneath it, shared by a society page account, read, "The perfect match, business and beyond?" The ground beneath Elena tilted. She waited until the next evening when he arrived at La Dolce Vita with roses and that hopeful, boyish look she had come to adore. She met him at the door before he could sit. "You're engaged," she said, voice flat. "No, too quick. It's complicated. A suggestion. A merger clause my board is pushing." "I'm not." "You smiled in the picture," she interrupted. "You didn't look like a man being forced. You looked comfortable." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Elena, I love you. You know that." "I know you love control," she answered, eyes glistening. "I know you're terrified of losing it. So you keep one foot planted firmly in your old life while you test the waters of mine. But I won't be the half measure. I won't be the secret you keep until it's convenient to choose." He reached for her hand. She stepped back. "I need time," she whispered. "To breathe. To think." 2 days later she was gone. Her mother's latest scans had shown progression. The doctors in Siena wanted her home, urgently. Elena booked the ticket with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, packed her life into a single battered suitcase, and told herself this was mercy. Love shouldn't feel like begging for scraps. She left no forwarding address. She told no one at the restaurant where she was going. She simply disappeared. Ethan discovered her absence when he walked into La Dolce Vita and found her station empty. Marco, reluctant but kind, handed him a folded note. "I'm going home to take care of my mother. Please don't follow me. Some things aren't meant to last forever. Be happy, Ethan. You deserve that." He read it 3 times. Then 4. The words refused to stay in focus. He booked a flight to Florence that same night. He arrived in Tuscany just as the sun bled purple across the hills. He rented the first car he could find, a small Fiat that felt absurdly inadequate, and drove the narrow, winding roads to the village Elena had described in so many quiet moments. The house was exactly as she had painted it, small, whitewashed, roses rioting over the stone walls, a clothesline strung with sheets that snapped in the warm breeze. He stood on the threshold for a full minute before he knocked. Elena opened the door. Her eyes widened in shock, then filled with tears so quickly they spilled over before she could blink them away. "You came," she breathed. "I never really left," he said, voice rough. "Not in any way that mattered." She stepped aside and let him in. They sat at the scarred kitchen table while her mother slept fitfully in the next room, the soft beep of a monitor the only sound besides their breathing. Elena spoke first, haltingly at first, then in a rush. She told him how she had recognized him the very first night at the restaurant. How the boy who had once chased her through the olive trees with terrible pronunciation and endless promises had grown into the man who tried to humiliate her in front of strangers. How she had fallen in love anyway, against every instinct, hoping against hope that he would one day remember. How terrified she had been that he never would. Ethan listened, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. When she finished, he reached across the table and took both her hands in his. "I remembered," he said quietly. "The instant you answered me in Italian that first night. Your voice, your laugh, the way you tilt your head when you're angry. I remembered everything. I was afraid. Afraid that admitting who you were to me meant admitting who I had become. Arrogant. Hollow. Safe behind money and titles. I thought if I kept you separate, I could keep both worlds. I was wrong." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I sold my shares," he told her. "I stepped down as CEO yesterday morning. The merger is dead. Victoria is furious. The board is in open revolt. The stock price dropped 17% in after-hours trading. I don't care. None of it matters. I want the life we talked about on those dawn walks in the park. I want mornings with you. I want to learn how to prune olive trees and fail spectacularly at it. I want to be the man who deserves to stand beside you, not the one who almost broke you." Tears streamed freely down Elena's cheeks now. "You gave up everything," she whispered. "I gave up what I never truly wanted," he answered. "I chose what I've always needed." She looked at the ring, simple, vintage, a single emerald the exact shade of new olive leaves. She looked at him. at the man who had crossed an ocean to find her, who had dismantled his empire for the chance to start over. Then she nodded. They married the following spring in the village square beneath the same ancient cypress trees that had shaded their childhood games. Her mother, frail but fiercely present, sat in the front row, a shawl over her shoulders and tears shining in her eyes. The guests numbered fewer than 30. A handful of friends who had flown in from New York, villagers who had known Elena since she was small enough to hide in the olive branches. No press, no photographers, no red carpets. Just music from a lone accordion, wildflowers in jam jars, and the scent of rosemary carried on the breeze. Ethan had quietly purchased the parcel of land next door, an old, neglected grove that had belonged to a family who moved to the city decades earlier. Together they began the slow, patient work of bringing it back to life. He learned to speak Italian without the crisp, academic edges, his accent softened by her corrections and her laughter. She finished her degree online, late at night with a cup of chamomile and his head resting on her lap. They argued sometimes, about money, there was less of it now, about pride, both had too much, about the ghosts of their old lives that still whispered in quiet moments. But every argument ended the same way, arms around each other, apologies murmured against skin, promises renewed. Love, they came to understand, was never a single grand gesture. It was the daily choice, to stay, to forgive, to try again, even when easier paths glittered on the horizon. And every evening, as the sun sank behind the rolling hills and the air filled with the perfume of rosemary, thyme, and warm earth, they sat together on the stone porch they had rebuilt themselves. They watched the sky shift from gold to rose to deepest indigo. Words were rarely necessary. They had already spoken the only ones that truly mattered. Years passed gently. The olive trees they planted grew tall enough to cast shade. Her mother lived long enough to hold their first child, a girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's stubborn mouth. They named her Sophia, after the wisdom they had both learned the hard way. The grove became profitable, not wildly, but enough. Enough for school fees, enough for travel back to New York once a year to see old friends, enough for quiet evenings when they could simply sit and be grateful. Sometimes Elena would catch Ethan staring at her across the kitchen while she stirred risotto, and she would see the same wonder in his eyes that she felt in her chest. Sometimes he would wake before dawn and find her already outside among the trees, and he would wrap his arms around her from behind and whisper thank you against her hair. They never forgot the night it began, the night sharp words were traded over a plate of ossobuco. They never let themselves forget how close they came to losing each other. That memory became their compass, proof that even the deepest wounds could heal when tended with patience and truth. And on the rare nights when doubt crept in, when the old fears whispered that they didn't deserve this happiness, they held tighter. They remembered the boy and girl under the olive tree. They remembered the restaurant in Manhattan where pride met vulnerability. They remembered the airport goodbyes that weren't goodbyes at all. Love had found them in the most unlikely place. And once found, it refused to let go. If this story touched something deep inside you, if it reminded you that second chances exist, that love can arrive wearing the strangest disguises, that sometimes the bravest thing we do is choose each other again and again, then please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more emotional love stories that remind us what really matters. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your heart is seen here. Always.